You are probably sitting in your car right now.
Yeah.
The engine is off, but you haven't taken the keys out of the ignition yet.
You're just sitting there in the quiet.
Right. Or maybe it's, 3 in the morning. And the only light in the room is the glaring blue of your phone screen. You are hundreds of pages deep into a forum thread, reading words written by strangers that feel like someone has, like they've reached into your chest and pulled out your most secret, fundamental operating codes.
And you might be crying.
Yeah, a heavy, exhausted, and finally overwhelming kind of crying. And the strangest part is, you might not even be entirely sure what the tears are for.
Right, because you don't know if it's devastation or if it is the deepest, most profound exhalation of breath you have taken in your entire life.
Exactly. It's the moment where every single memory you hold begins to rotate. You look back at the job you couldn't keep, no matter how desperately you tried to push through the exhaustion.
Your friendships that just faded out silently.
Yeah, leaving you completely bewildered, wondering what invisible rule you broke this time. You look back at the sheer bone-deep tiredness that no amount of sleep, no holiday, no self-care routine could ever fix. It all starts turning like a Rubik's Cube in your mind.
And suddenly just clicks.
It does, with a terrifying, beautiful clarity. It clicks into a solution you didn't even know you were allowed to look for. This is Quiet Power from Hey ASD.
And we are starting right inside that feeling today.
We are. Because we know exactly where you are. We're not here to debate diagnostic criteria, and we're certainly not here to talk about you in clinical or sterile terms.
Not at all.
I am speaking to you from inside this house. We are looking at what happens now, what happens the day after, the month after, the year after the realization. Because this diagnosis does not rewrite your past.
It explains it.
It explains it.
Yeah.
And that explanation brings with it an immense, undeniable tension. You're sitting in a paradox right now.
A massive paradox. You're feeling this profound physical relief. And at the exact same moment, you're drowning in an enormous, crushing grief.
And our entire goal for this deep dive is to hold both of those truths at once. I am not going to try to fix either of them for you.
We're just going to sit in them.
Right.
Yeah.
Because before we can talk about where you go from here, we have to look at the sheer scale of what was missed. We have to look at the decades.
The decades. That really is the word, isn't it?
It is. When we look at the reality of late diagnosis, the average age for adults is around 31. But if you're a woman, you were likely missed for 4 to 5 years longer than that.
Easily.
And girls, especially those of us who learn to mimic the social behaviors around us, are frequently missed entirely in childhood. You spend 30, 40, maybe 50 years completely unidentified.
Just navigating a world that feels like it's built out of sandpaper.
Using a map drawn for an entirely different landscape. And we need to establish a foundational truth right here, right at the start. You were not missed because your traits were subtle. You were not missed because you were somehow, barely autistic, or because your internal experience wasn't intense. You were missed because the medical system, the diagnostic criteria, the entire psychological establishment built their systems around a painfully narrow, highly inaccurate profile.
They were looking for one very specific thing.
Exactly. For decades, the medical model essentially only looked for young boys with very obvious outward-facing support needs. If your struggles were internal, if your meltdowns happened silently in your bedroom rather than loudly in a classroom, the system literally did not have a category for you.
It's infuriating. Because if you didn't fit that precise, rigid clinical template, you were invisible.
Completely invisible.
The diagnostic tools were entirely based on how much of an inconvenience a person was to the neurotypical adults around them.
Right. Not based on the internal lived experience of the nervous system.
But I want to ask you about something here, because this is where it gets incredibly insidious. The very things that helped you survive, passing as neurotypical, managing to hold down a job, forcing yourself to maintain eye contact, mirroring the conversational cadence of your colleagues, all of that.
Yeah.
When you spend your whole life successfully performing the neurotypical script, how does that intelligence and competence effectively weaponize the medical system against you? Like, how does succeeding, even at a massive personal cost, become the barrier to getting support?
That is the exact contradiction so many of us run into.
Yeah.
It weaponizes the system against you because intelligence and competence act as a smokescreen.
That smokescreen.
Yeah. When you are highly capable, your brain develops incredibly elaborate, complex coping strategies to mask the supports that simply aren't in place for you. You use your intellect to manually calculate social interactions that neurotypical brains process automatically.
It's a constant mathematical equation.
It is exhausting. You are calculating eye contact, tone of voice, posture, the exact timing of a laugh. You use your competence to build rigid protective routines so your nervous system doesn't fall apart. But when a clinician looks at you, they don't see the manual processing, do they?
No, they don't see the spreadsheet running in your head just to order a coffee.
Exactly. They don't see the exhaustion, they just see the competence. They see the fact that you are holding a conversation, articulating your feelings, and maintaining a career.
And because they are trained to look for deficits in outward behavior, they use your competence to invalidate your internal struggle.
Right. They assume that if you were truly struggling, you wouldn't be able to articulate it so well.
Yeah.
It is a catch-22. You are too traumatized to keep going, but you are too articulate for them to believe you.
It's like trying to run a relentless, massive software update on the completely wrong operating system for decades.
Well, that's exactly what it feels like.
Your hardware is running at 110% capacity just to perform basic background functions. The fan is screaming. The computer is literally overheating. And the whole time, society, your teachers, your bosses, and the medical system are just blaming the computer for running hot.
Telling you to just cool down.
Right. They don't realize you're running the wrong code.
And when you are running the wrong code and the system keeps crashing, the medical professionals don't realize the operating system is fundamentally different. So they just start throwing patches at it.
Which leads directly to the trauma of the misdiagnosis cascade.
The cascade, yes. Up to 80% of adults diagnosed late were handed entirely different, incorrect labels first. If you're listening to this, you probably have a whole filing cabinet of these labels. You have spent years collecting them.
Let's break that cascade down, actually, because the specific labels you were given weren't random.
No, they weren't.
They were the medical system's attempt to categorize the smoke without ever looking for the fire. Let's start with the most common one, anxiety.
Oh, the anxiety label.
You go to a doctor, you say you are overwhelmed, you are panicking in grocery stores, you can't cope with unexpected changes. They write down generalized anxiety disorder.
Right. And of course you had anxiety. Your heart rate was elevated, your cortisol was spiking, but the anxiety wasn't the root problem. It wasn't some chemical imbalance occurring in a vacuum.
Yeah. No.
It was the completely natural, predictable, biological symptom of a nervous system existing in a constant state of fight or flight. You were spending every social interaction trying to decode invisible rules.
Just trying to survive the environment.
Exactly. You were existing in sensory environments, fluorescent lights, layered noises, unpredictable crowds that felt like a physical assault on your nervous system. The anxiety was a totally rational response to unsupported autism.
Right. Treating the anxiety without addressing the sensory and social overload is like giving painkillers to someone standing on hot coals instead of just telling them they are allowed to step off the coals.
That is a perfect way to put it. And then we look at depression and ADHD. How often is the absolute soul-crushing exhaustion of masking misread as clinical depression?
Because from the outside, they can look remarkably similar, can't they?
Incredibly similar. The withdrawal, the lack of energy, the inability to initiate tasks. When you are exhausted from pretending to be someone you aren't, you withdraw. When maintaining friendships requires a level of social performance that drains your battery to zero, you isolate yourself.
And when you are isolated and exhausted, you look depressed.
You might even feel depressed. But standard depression treatments, CBT, behavioral activation, pushing yourself to get out more, often make autistic burnout so much worse.
Because you were told to push through the fatigue.
Right, when fatigue is the exact thing destroying you. And with ADHD, while it frequently co-occurs with autism, clinicians often spot the executive function struggles, the difficulty starting tasks, the time blindness, but they completely miss the rigid need for routine, the sensory processing differences, and the social communication differences that point to autism.
They see the chaos, but they miss the intense need for order.
Exactly. Which brings us to the diagnoses that carry a particularly heavy weight and often a profound amount of medical trauma. This is for women. Borderline personality disorder and bipolar disorder.
The way the diagnostic system has mishandled this is it's staggering.
It is devastating. When you are pushed past your capacity, when your nervous system simply cannot take in another piece of sensory or social data, you experience meltdowns. Or you hit a wall of burnout where you just collapse, entirely unable to function after a period of overexertion.
And to an untrained clinician, to meltdown looks like emotional instability.
Yes, a cycle of intense masking and overachieving, followed by a sudden crash where you cannot leave your bed, looks like bipolar cycling. But the mechanism underneath is entirely different.
Because borderline personality disorder is rooted in a fundamental instability in how you see yourself, often driven by a deep fear of abandonment and trauma. But your meltdowns aren't about manipulating relationships or fearing abandonment. They are a neurological hardware crash.
Exactly. Autism is a fundamental difference in how you process the sensory and social world. Treating you for a personality disorder when you are actually just having a neurological response to sensory overload doesn't just fail to help, it actively harms you.
It tells you that your distress is a character flaw.
Right. It tells you that your sensory pain is just emotional volatility. You spend years, maybe decades, in therapies that are trying to fix your personality. You are prescribed heavy medications for conditions you do not have.
Just sitting in clinical offices being told that your perception of reality is distorted.
Being told you just need to try harder, be more resilient, manage your stress better, and stop being so sensitive. You spend years working on the absolute wrong problem, internalizing the belief that you are just a fundamentally broken, failed, neurotypical person.
And that right there is the deepest scar of the misdiagnosis cascade. It teaches you that you are wrong about yourself.
It teaches you not to trust your own body, your own instincts,
Wow.
your own pain.
And that is exactly why, when you finally get the correct framework, the reaction is so immense. Which brings us back to the core of this experience, the relief-grief paradox.
Yeah. If you are listening to this and you are in the immediate aftermath, you know exactly what the relief feels like.
It's entirely visceral, isn't it? It is a physical sensation.
It is the feeling of your shoulders literally dropping 2 inches. Because decades of self-blame, decades of carrying this heavy, suffocating armor of shame are finally lifting. It is the deep cellular validation of a single sentence. It wasn't your fault.
The job you couldn't keep, it wasn't your fault.
The relationship that ended because you were deemed too intense or too distant. It wasn't your fault.
The burnout you thought was a moral failing, the exhaustion you thought was laziness, none of it was your fault. You were navigating a labyrinth in the dark.
But right alongside that relief, literally occupying the exact same space in your chest, is the grief.
Yeah.
And we need to sit in that grief for a moment.
We have to.
Because society is going to try to rush you out of it. The people around you are going to want you to focus on the relief because the relief is palatable.
But the relief makes sense to them. The grief is uncomfortable.
Right. But you are allowed to mourn right now. You are allowed to mourn the time lost to the wrong framework. You are allowed to mourn the unsupported child you were.
The child who needed accommodation, who needed a sensory-friendly environment, who needed permission to soothe their nervous system.
And who instead received criticism, punishment, and the label of being difficult or naughty or too sensitive.
You are allowed to mourn the jobs, the friendships, the romantic relationships that did not survive the misunderstandings.
The connections you could have had if you had known how to ask for what you needed, or if the other person had known they were speaking to a different neurotype. You mourn the countless arguments over miscommunications that were simply 2 different operating systems trying to read the same file.
And perhaps most deeply, you are allowed to mourn the version of yourself who spent decades adapting, contorting, and performing just to survive.
The sheer terrifying amount of energy you spent on that performance could have gone somewhere else.
Yeah.
Could have gone into your passions, your joy, your actual life. You are grieving the life you might have had if anyone, had seen you earlier.
You know, there's a moment when you're reading through the shared experiences of late diagnosed adults, and you find someone who manages to distill this exact complex agony into a few words. Have you read The Unmasking Years by Daniel Burford?
Yes, I have.
He was diagnosed at 38, and he articulates this peak of the paradox so perfectly. He writes, "Everything makes sense now, and nothing will ever be the same."
That is exactly it. It captures the dual reality perfectly. You are completely seen and completely erased at the exact same time.
Because your entire history finally makes logical sense, but the narrative you built to survive it, the narrative that you were just a quirky, highly stressed person who needed to try harder, that narrative is gone.
You have to rebuild your understanding of yourself from the ground up. And this is where we need to strongly, firmly, without any hesitation, dismantle something you're going to encounter.
Oh, the toxic positivity.
The toxic positivity of the people around you. When you try to express this immense grief, when you try to articulate the anger you feel at the lost decades, Someone is inevitably going to look at you, and they're going to tell you that you should just look on the bright side.
Well, at least you have an answer now.
Yes, they'll tell you that at least you know now, and you should focus on the positive.
That sentiment is poison.
It is poison.
It is entirely designed to dismiss your reality and shut down your grief. Because telling you to focus on the positive isn't actually about comforting you. It is a dismissal meant to make the other person comfortable.
Precisely. They do not know how to sit with the weight of your lost decades. They do not know how to process your anger at the medical system or your sorrow for the child you were. So they demand that you find a silver lining instantly so they don't have to feel awkward or complicit.
And we're here to grant you explicit permission to reject that. You are allowed to refuse to perform gratitude.
You do not have to be thankful for a system that failed you for 30 years just because it finally handed you a piece of paper.
No. You are allowed to be angry at the systems that missed you, angry at the professionals who dismissed you, angry at the culture that made you believe your neurological differences were personal failures.
Grief is not ungrateful. Feeling devastated about what you lost does not cancel out the relief of finally knowing. You do not owe anyone a tidy redemption arc.
You don't owe anyone a narrative where your diagnosis is just a fun new fact about yourself.
Right. It's a profound paradigm shift, and you are allowed to treat it with the gravity it deserves.
So if we are looking at the mechanism that actually kept you hidden for so long, we have to look at the mask.
The mask.
Yeah. If you are listening to this, you might be looking back at all the pretending you did, the code switching, the mimicking, the mirroring, and you might be feeling a strange sense of guilt. A lot of people express feeling like they lied to the people they love, or like they should have just been brave enough to be their authentic selves.
We need to clear that up immediately. Let's completely remove the guilt. Masking was never a choice.
Never.
You did not wake up one day as an 8-year-old and decide to be deceptive. Masking was survival conditioning. You learned to mask through 1,000 tiny punishments.
1,000 tiny punishments. That captures the reality of childhood. So, exactly. Let's break down what those punishments actually look like, because they are rarely massive traumatic events.
No, they are the water you swam in. They were the micro corrections of everyday life. It's the eye roll from a teacher when you asked a clarifying question because their instructions were entirely implicit and you needed explicit details.
It's the reprimand from a parent for not looking a relative in the eye.
It's the friendships on the playground that suddenly vanished when you talked too long about the specific mechanics of a train or a book or an insect because you were trying to share your joy and they perceived it as dominating the conversation.
Your brain did what human brains are evolutionarily wired to do. It adapted to avoid negative outcomes.
You learned very quickly and very painfully that your authentic, unedited self was not safe. So you constructed a version of yourself that was.
Let's talk about the actual mechanics of what that performance required from you, because it is staggering when you lay it out in the light of day. People who don't have to mask think of it as just, being polite or putting your best foot forward.
But it's so much more granular and exhausting than that. It is a full-time manual operation of a body and mind. Masking is forcing painful eye contact. And we need to explain what that pain actually is. It isn't just shyness.
No, not at all.
For many, maintaining eye contact feels like staring directly into the sun. It triggers the amygdala. It feels like a physical threat. Yet you manually forced your eyes to look at the other person, calculating exactly how many seconds to hold it before looking away so you didn't appear aggressive.
And then looking back so you didn't appear evasive.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And while you were doing that mathematical calculation with your eyes, you were scripting conversations.
You're not just chatting, you are mapping out branching dialogue trees in your head.
Right. If they say X, I will deploy polite chuckle Y and ask follow-up question Z. You are doing this hours in advance just to survive a 10-minute coffee break at the office.
And you are actively suppressing your body's natural urge to stim.
Stimming, whether it is flapping your hands, rocking, chewing your lip, tapping your fingers, is how your nervous system regulates itself. It is how you disperse excess energy or soothe yourself in an overwhelming environment.
But because society deems those movements weird, you lock your muscles down.
You swallow the energy. You force your body into a socially acceptable, rigid stillness, which acts like a pressure cooker for your nervous system. You are constantly running a massive background program in your brain to manually mimic neurotypical body language, facial expressions, and vocal tones.
And the toll of running that background program every single second you are in public leads us directly to a very specific, very dangerous outcome: autistic burnout.
Yes.
And we need to be incredibly precise here because this is completely different from the standard occupational burnout you read about in business magazines or self-help blogs, isn't it?
Completely different. Standard occupational burnout is usually about being overworked in a job. It is about demanding deadlines, poor management, or a lack of work-life balance.
A holiday or a job change can usually resolve it.
Right. Autistic burnout is a total systemic nervous system collapse. It is the result of chronic, sustained masking combined with sensory overload and the sheer unending effort of navigating a world that is fundamentally hostile to your neurology.
The way it is described by those living it is terrifying. It is a profound loss of skills. It is not just needing a holiday. It is waking up and realizing that your capacity to function has evaporated.
It is waking up and realizing that speech is temporarily inaccessible. Your brain simply cannot sequence the motor functions required to form words.
It is realizing that your executive function has completely disappeared.
You cannot plan how to make a piece of toast, let alone navigate a workday. Your tolerance for any sensory input, light, sound, touch, is at zero. The hum of the refrigerator feels like a drill in your skull.
Your tolerance for social interaction, even with the people you love most in the world, is just gone.
You are completely depleted on a cellular level. And the tragedy is, because you didn't know you were autistic, you likely pushed through these burnouts for years.
You didn't know what was happening. You thought you were just dealing with severe depression, or that you were failing at being an adult.
You thought you were lazy. You punished yourself for losing capacity.
And punishing yourself for losing capacity only deepens the burnout.
You double down. You force yourself to work harder, mask harder, pretend harder, which strips the last remaining reserves from your nervous system. You trap yourself in a cycle of overexertion and collapse.
So if we look at this logically, if the mask is what caused the chronic stress, and the chronic stress is what causes the burnout, the immediate intuitive next step seems to be just dropping the mask entirely. Just rip it off overnight.
Throw it away.
Throw it away and be your authentic self everywhere, all the time. But when we look at the reality of the world we live in, is that actually safe or realistic for you to do?
It is neither safe nor realistic to do it overnight, and trying to do so will likely send your nervous system into shock. We have to be very careful with the modern discourse around unmasking because it often frames it as a simple, empowering switch you just flip.
Right, like a montage in a film.
Exactly, but you cannot just turn it off. Masking has kept you safe, it has kept you employed, it has prevented you from being targeted. We have to distinguish very clearly between survival masking and strategic masking.
Let's unpack that difference because it is crucial for navigating the post-diagnosis world. What is survival masking?
Survival masking is what you have been doing your whole life. It is unconscious, chronic, and automatic. It is a trauma response. It is masking because you fundamentally believe that your true self is unacceptable, broken, and unlovable.
You masked to hide your core identity.
That is the masking that drains your soul, that leads to burnout.
Yeah.
And that is the masking that must be dismantled. But it has to be dismantled slowly, iteratively, delicately.
And strategic masking.
Strategic masking is conscious and deliberate. It is a tool. It is choosing to perform neurotypicality in a specific, limited context because you have weighed the costs and the benefits, and you have decided that the performance is necessary for your physical safety, your financial security, or your social goals.
You might strategically mask during a job interview because you know the neurotypical interviewer expects a certain cadence.
Yes. You might strategically mask during a traffic stop for your own safety. You might mask at a specific family gathering because the cost of the ensuing argument is higher than the cost of pretending for 2 hours.
The goal isn't to be 100% unmasked everywhere all the time. The goal is agency. It is to have a choice, to know when you are masking, to know why you are doing it, and to ensure you have spaces in your life, your home, your close relationships where you don't have to do it at all.
Exactly. You are moving from autopilot to manual control. You're taking the steering wheel back. But when you start slowly taking off that survival mask, when you start sitting in those safe spaces and asking your brain what it actually wants, you are faced with a massive, profoundly disorienting phase. Meeting yourself.
It is an identity disruption on a massive scale.
Yeah.
You start asking, who am I when no one is watching? And because you have spent 30 or 40 years performing a self specifically designed to keep other people comfortable, you realize you might have lost track of your own preferences.
It is incredibly destabilizing. You might sit down one evening and realize, with a shock, that you don't actually like the hobbies you've been doing for a decade.
You only did them because they were socially acceptable ways to spend time with people.
Right. You might look in your wardrobe and realize you hate the clothes you wear because they are texturally miserable. but you bought them to look professional. You might despise the social events you have been forcing yourself to endure for years. The loud pubs, the networking events, the dinner parties. You built a life for a neurotypical person. And now you have to figure out how an autistic person actually wants to live in it.
I read an analogy that frames this so perfectly. It is like wearing a pair of shoes that are 3 sizes too small for 30 years. You've walked miles in them, you've run marathons in them, you've built your whole entire life assuming that walking is just supposed to be excruciatingly painful.
You thought everyone was in pain, and they were just better at hiding it than you.
And unmasking is finally taking those shoes off. But when you do, you don't just immediately start sprinting through a meadow. You have to look at your feet. You realize they are bruised and reshaped by the constraints.
You have to relearn how your toes actually move. You have to figure out how to balance your weight on the ground without the rigid leather walls you've always known.
That is exactly what the sensory and communication discovery phase is like. You have to relearn your own body. You have to start paying attention to what actually helps your nervous system rather than what you think should help or what works for neurotypical people.
This is where we talk about finding sensory glimmers. For years, your focus has been on avoiding sensory triggers, but you also have to actively seek out the inputs that regulate you.
What does a glimmer look like in practice?
It looks like paying attention to tiny, micro moments of neurological ease. It might be the specific heavy weight of a cotton jumper. It might be sitting in your parked car for 10 minutes of absolute unbroken silence before going into the house after work.
It might be allowing your hands to flap or your body to rock when you are excited or overwhelmed instead of locking your muscles down to appear normal.
Exactly. It is giving your body permission to self-regulate. It is discovering interoception, the ability to read your body's internal signals. Because you have ignored your discomfort for so long, you might not realize you are hungry until you are starving and crashing.
You might not realize you need the toilet until it is an emergency.
You have to rebuild the communication lines between your brain and your body.
And a massive part of this unlearning is redesigning your environment without waiting for anyone's permission. For your whole life, the default strategy has been just deal with it.
The lights are too bright. Deal with it.
The tags on your clothes are scratching you to the point of distraction. Deal with it.
The grocery store music is making your brain vibrate. Deal with it. Society constantly frames sensory needs as weaknesses or as a moral failing of being too sensitive.
But they aren't weaknesses. They're not character flaws. Your sensory needs are vital, exact biological data about how your nervous system functions. Your brain processes sensory input differently.
A fluorescent light isn't just an annoyance. It is a rapid strobe light that your brain cannot filter out. And you have absolute, total permission to stop just dealing with it.
You are allowed to dim the lights. You are allowed to wear noise-canceling headphones in the grocery store or on the train or in your own living room. You are allowed to take scissors and cut the tags out of every single piece of clothing you own.
You do not need a clinical note to justify making your physical space comfortable for your own neurology.
You are allowed to redesign your environment so you aren't constantly bleeding energy just by existing in a room. You have a finite amount of cognitive and physical energy each day. If you spend 40% of it just fighting the lighting in your office, you have nothing left for your actual life.
And that realization ties directly into another major, deeply ingrained system you have to dismantle: productivity poison.
This is a deep one. This is where unmasking collides with capitalism. As a late-diagnosed adult, you have likely internalized an immense amount of guilt. You measure your worth as a human being by how much you can produce.
And because you have always had to work twice as hard, manually processing everything to produce the same output as a neurotypical colleague, you feel like you are always falling behind. You feel chronically inadequate.
But the reality, the fundamental truth you have to accept is this. Burnout is a capacity problem, not a productivity problem. You cannot time manage your way out of a neurological deficit.
You cannot life hack your way out of sensory exhaustion. Downloading a new calendar app is not going to fix a nervous system that is fundamentally out of alignment with its environment.
You have to grant yourself the explicit permission to build a slower, smaller, more sustainable life. You do not have to earn your rest by destroying yourself first. Rest is not a reward for productivity.
Rest is a biological requirement, especially for an autistic nervous system navigating a neurotypical world. Lowering your expectations of what you should be able to do in a day isn't giving up. It isn't failing.
It is finally applying the correct accurate standard to your life. It is adjusting the load to match the actual real-world capacity of the vehicle.
And as you do this, as you change your standards, as you unmask, as you stop performing, as you start saying no to things that drain you, your relationships are going to change. We have to talk about the relationship recalibrations, because this is where the theoretical internal work of unmasking hits the reality of the people in your life.
It is often the most painful part of the entire process, because when you change the rules of engagement, the dynamics of your relationships must shift. You have been playing a specific role for decades.
The role of the accommodating, quiet, low-maintenance friend who always goes with the flow, even if the flow is leading you into a sensory nightmare.
You have to acknowledge that some friends, and even family members, are going to grieve the masked version of you. They are going to miss the person who never complained. They are going to miss the person who did all the emotional heavy lifting to bridge the communication gap.
And if a relationship was built entirely on the foundation of you suppressing your needs to keep the other person comfortable, that relationship might not survive your unmasking.
When you start setting boundaries, when you stop attending events that cause you pain, when you start communicating directly instead of softening every word to protect their ego, they might pull away.
They might call you selfish, and that is a valid, necessary loss. It hurts deeply, but it is necessary. You are shedding weight you were never meant to carry.
To help you navigate this, we need to outline exactly what you are putting down, what you are not responsible for, because the impulse to manage everyone else's reaction to your diagnosis is incredibly strong. First, you are not responsible for educating everyone in your life about autism.
If people want to understand, there are books, there are articles, there are podcasts. You do not have to be a walking encyclopedia for their benefit. You are living the experience. You do not have to become a professor of it just to justify your existence.
Second, you are not responsible for making neurotypical people comfortable with your autistic traits or your direct communication.
Your existence does not need to be softened to be palatable. If your directness feels blunt to them, or if your stimming makes them feel awkward, that is their discomfort to manage. It is not your job to shrink yourself or to exhaust yourself masking, just so they don't have to confront their own preconceived notions of what normal behavior looks like.
Third, you do not have to be an inspirational success story, and you do not have to prove that your differences are a superpower.
This is so vital. The neurodiversity movement sometimes swings so hard into positivity that it becomes toxic. You are allowed to just exist. You are allowed to struggle. You are allowed to find things incredibly hard. You do not owe society a tidy redemption narrative where your autism is framed as a magical gift that makes you a genius coder or a brilliant artist.
Sometimes it is just hard. Sometimes the grocery store is just a nightmare, and you are allowed to say it is a nightmare.
Let's address one specific relationship dynamic that is incredibly fraught for late diagnosed adults: navigating your parents' grief.
Yeah, when you tell your parents about your diagnosis, a very common reaction is for them to say, "I feel so guilty I didn't see it," or "I'm so sorry we didn't get you help." And the deeply ingrained reflexive instinct as a child, no matter how old you are, is to comfort them.
The instinct is to immediately say, "It's okay, you did your best, it wasn't that bad, don't cry."
How do you resist that urge to minimize your own pain for their sake?
You have to hold the line firmly, even when it feels completely unnatural and deeply uncomfortable. A parent's guilt is their own emotion to carry. It is their luggage. It is not yours. You do not have to minimize your decades of struggle, your burnouts, your trauma, or your grief, just to absolve them of theirs.
You can love them. You can intellectually recognize that they didn't have the information, that the medical criteria was wrong, that they did what they could with the tools they had. But you must let them sit with their own feelings.
You have spent your entire life managing other people's comfort. You get to resign from that job today. You do not have to manage your parents' reaction to your neurology.
That is profound. Resigning from the job of managing everyone else's comfort. So where does this all lead? When you put down the mask, when you set the boundaries, when you let go of the guilt, what does life look like years down the road when the initial shock of the diagnosis has passed and the major grief has been processed?
It leads to the long exhale, the eventual quiet reality of post-traumatic growth. And the most important word in that sentence is quiet.
It's not a dramatic cinematic transformation, is it? You don't spin around in a field, the music swells, and suddenly everything is effortless and perfect.
Not at all. It is waking up on a random Tuesday and realizing that the deep, soul-depleting, bone-deep exhaustion you used to carry in your jaw and your shoulders is just, well, it's gone.
It is noticing that you navigated a whole week without a meltdown because your environment finally fits your nervous system.
You dimmed the lights, you said no to the loud party, you wore the comfortable clothes. It is the absence of the constant grinding friction you used to live with.
It is the realization that you are not fixed and you are not finished because you are never broken in the first place.
You were never broken. You were just finally aligned. We have to hold the tension that life as an autistic adult in a neurotypical world does not suddenly become easy. It will always require navigation. The world is still loud, the systems are still rigid, the misunderstandings will still happen, but your internal world finally makes sense. You finally know what kind of vehicle you are driving, and you finally have the right map.
And you finally get to stop apologizing for who you are.
The full article is at heyasd.com in the Autism blog.